Yeah, I can confidently say this is the most excited Dean and I have ever been in 7 years of doing this. I alluded to it earlier, but we truly believe we found our home at the CFTC, and we've been looking for a way to bring our product to all 50 states and nationalize our liquidity pool and the product that we've been building over the past few years. And we feel like we're right on the precipice of that.
Hey, this is Jesse here, and you're about to hear my discussion with Jake from ProphetX, which is America's #1 sports prediction market available in over 40 states. Joining me on the day that ProphetX announced its application with the CFTC to become both a DCM and DCO in the prediction market space, Jake gives us the inside scoop on why he calls the CFTC's regulatory framework their forever home. He also shares some insights into how the business has scaled since pivoting to a sweepstakes model a little over a year ago, how ProphetX plans to differentiate itself in the rapidly growing prediction market space, why they decided early that ProphetX won't operate an affiliated trading arm, the recent launch of their request for quote parlay product, observations on the cultural influence that prediction markets are having, and why he's more excited now than he's ever been for the future of the company. It was awesome to talk to Jake on a historic day for him and his team at ProphetX, and I know you're going to enjoy this one as much as I did.
The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 4 out of the top 5 US operators personalize player experiences with Optimove. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/bettingstartups. And if you like what you see, you'll get your first month free. All right, we are back here enrolling on the Betting Startups podcast. And today's guest is a returning guest who last joined me back in August of 2022, over 3 years ago now, back when his company was truly a startup at that time and was about to launch in the state of New Jersey as the first regulated sports betting exchange. Of course, I'm talking about Prophet. And with me, once again, welcome back to the podcast, Jake. How are you today?
Good, Jesse. Pleasure to be here.
So look, Jake, we've had this recording in the books for, 3 or 4 weeks now. And I was thinking this would be a general catch up and kind of a check in on how everything is going at Prophet. Though 2 hours ago, I was having my morning coffee, scrolling Twitter. And what's the first thing I see? Some headline news from Prophet, which is that you and the team have filed with the CFTC to become a DCM and a DCO. That's a lot of acronyms for me. I don't even necessarily know what those all stand for. So, we're going to talk a lot about that here today, Jake. But first and foremost, before we get into all of that, I'd love to just start by having you reflect a little bit on the last few years, right? I mean, as I mentioned, you and Dean joined me over 3 years ago now, right before you guys launched in New Jersey. And you guys gave it the old college try there in New Jersey, trying to bring the exchange model to the American shores. And obviously under the state-by-state model, you're a little bit constrained by the inability to pool liquidity across states. And, there's some inherent headwinds and challenges, least of which market access, costs, all of that stuff. Can you just give us your broad reflections on sort of that first chapter and then, your pivot just over a year ago to the sweepstakes model, which got you into somewhere closer to 40 states? And I guess all of that now setting up to the latest iteration of Prophet. Just give us your broad strokes reflections on the last few years, Jake.
Yeah, totally. A lot to unpack and all of that in the last few years. You obviously mentioned it in terms of us launching in New Jersey. That was an OSB license, so the same license that sportsbooks hold. We held that license for a little over 2 years and ultimately gave that up because of the pitfalls of being able to operate an exchange or a prediction market nationally in the US. So we were lucky enough to work with the DG, the DG was fantastic to work with every step of the way in New Jersey. They were able to regulate an exchange and understand, how peer-to-peer should ultimately be regulated. However, unfortunately, that was not the case for a lot of the other jurisdictions, which were too focused on either iGaming or just learning about sports books at the time. So we were essentially in only one state and trying to work with others to be able to expand and get licenses. And as a result, didn't see the scale, didn't see the opportunity within that regulatory vertical. Moved to a sweepstakes vertical a little over a year ago at this point. Business has been great since moving to sweepstakes, getting a more national target market and approach, building our brand out there. And we think we found our regulatory home with the CFTC, filing those applications today, as you mentioned. But we'll be working with the CFTC and staff, throughout the rest of this year and into next year for us to get approval and be able to launch in all 50 states. So it's been quite the journey, as you said. There's lots of positives, lots of negatives, lots of takeaways. Seen, 3 different regulatory verticals, 4 if you count our early days in the UK over the years. But we think we found our forever home, for lack of a better term.
I just want to ask Jake, as you said, been over a year now since you launched the sweepstakes model. Obviously, you guys now have unlocked a lot of the things that you were constrained by under the state-by-state model. What was the prompt to, I don't want to say abandon sweepstakes now, but the shift from the sweepstakes model to the CFTC model? Is there anything inherently with the sweepstakes model that kind of had you thinking this might not be your forever home, to borrow your language there a minute ago? Obviously, there's headwinds in the sweepstakes model right now. Some states are clamping down on it, but sort of why now, I guess, as it relates to this change from sweepstakes to the CFTC model?
Yeah, the headwinds we knew would always come with the sweepstakes model. It wasn't our forever home, not to keep harping on that, but it was, we were passing by and a great vertical for us to be able to build the business back up, get some scale, really see some product market fit on a national level. But it wasn't really due to those headwinds, as you mentioned. We thought they would come a little bit later in the process, but obviously things have been clamping down a lot sooner than I think anyone would have anticipated, and there's lots of momentum there. But sweepstakes in itself is not the best regulatory vertical for, I would say, any sports platform, let alone an exchange. You're dealing with a freemium currency. You're dealing with dual currency systems. You're dealing with, some lingo and language that's not familiar to your typical customer, purchasing, redeeming, playing, things of that nature. So there was definitely a lot of friction, and we obviously are still operating the sweepstakes platform and see that friction on a day-to-day basis. So being able to get, to a much more akin terminology and, regulatory vertical that the product belongs in will be a huge uplift for our consumers, for ourselves. So you combine that with the headwinds, and it was a pretty easy decision on where things should be going.
And when you guys launched Sweepstakes, Jake, like, as I say, it unlocked the cross-border liquidity, the cross-state liquidity, right? You're reaching that scale you were unable to do before. By getting to that point, like, what are some of the things you've learned actually getting to the scale you had always aspired to, right? To some extent, sounds like, the hypotheses were validated, but what are some of the key learnings, I guess, over the last year operating with the Sweepstakes model?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's validation, right? It's finding product market fit. We've been able to learn from, so many more customers in terms of how our product fits within the market, the downfalls of the product, things we need to improve upon. So we've been working obviously on hearing customer feedback and putting the customer first and just building that product up day over day. And when you're at scale, you're able to do that on a much quicker cycle. So being able to get that product feedback, understand that the product is something that the consumer wants, something that we should continue building, should continue scaling. That was first and foremost of the sweepstakes model. And I can't, express enough, obviously, how much that validation has only blown up in recent months with Kalshi, with Polymarket, with prediction markets becoming more and more mainstream. So we've been getting, fantastic feedback that ultimately this product is something that belongs in the ecosystem. Where exactly, I think a lot of people are still figuring out, but we've got great conviction that this will be something that will be here for the long haul.
Let's dive in a little bit now to some of the aspects of the press release that went out this morning announcing this, Jake. First thing that caught my attention right away, there was a comment, I don't know if it was in the release itself or maybe an accompanying article you were quoted in, but in any case, I do believe you made reference to the fact that under the CFTC model, once ProphetX launches with that model, you do plan to only offer sport event contracts and not necessarily offer the wider array of markets that we've seen on some of the other prediction markets on things like elections, pop culture, even things like the weather. Talk us through a bit of the thinking there, right? What's some of the strategic thinking around just staying in your lane with sports only and, possibly shutting yourself off to more liquidity with other non-sport related markets? Just give us a bit of a sense of what you guys are thinking in making some of those decisions early on here.
Yeah, we're definitely a sports first and sports native platform. If you go to our site, it's only sports right now. And the depth of markets across all these sports and the leagues that we carry is, pretty unmatched comparatively across the board, especially for those currently operating in the CFTC vertical offering sports event contracts. I wouldn't say we're 100% shut off to any of the above. Crypto is actually going to be a big focus of ours. We're going to start accepting crypto purchases and redemptions in the sweepstakes model shortly here. So we want to be able to grow to a more, crypto-friendly user base, and whether that's purchasing and redeeming with stablecoins or other assets, that will be available shortly and something that we will absolutely lean into with the CFTC. So crypto derivatives will probably be our first step into those secondary markets, but things like politics and pop culture, we want to get to eventually, but we definitely want to keep focusing on and building out our sports offering in the interim. So I'm not sure, I have to go back and check which article that was and everything, but we definitely will be listing other things, especially with the focus on crypto.
Got it. For reference, I think it was a Sportico article I was reading this morning, which also mentioned this, which is that, look, I guess zooming out a little bit, some of the other incumbent prediction markets, such as Kalshi, have been criticized to an extent for operating an affiliated trading arm. And look, while those technically might be arm's length from the platform itself, it certainly does create a perception of there being potentially a conflict of interest and potentially erodes the messaging of the market being fully peer-to-peer. So again, in this release or in one of your comments, you were pretty quick to mention the fact that Prophet won't operate an affiliated trading arm under the CFTC model. Again, can you just talk about some of the thinking and decisioning that went into that one, Jake?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, playing in a peer-to-peer environment is something that everyone should be able to do and is necessary for the ecosystem, and something that I think all of us from a prediction market space share across the board. I would say the reason to not offer or be trading on our own platform or have an affiliate trading on our own platform is twofold. I think one, it's resourcing, right? It's not something we've ever done, and that's not really the main reason, but kind of the low-hanging fruit answer of, we just don't have a trading arm right now. But the second is that we think there's long-term negative effects and downstream effects of doing so. As you integrate more and more service providers and more market makers and more institutional liquidity or individual liquidity, I know our API is obviously open. I know Kalshi has one as well. I'm sure Polymarket will be there quickly behind. But as you are trying to create a competitive and fair environment, trading on your own platform and monetizing your own customer base just has a ton of inherent obstacles associated with it. So you trade the short term, look how liquid these markets are, and the, buy versus sell liquidity problem in starting any type of exchange, for a long-term problem, which is how do I make decisions based on how I'm monetizing my product and how our affiliate is trading versus the long-term health of the exchange overall. So you can do things like, obviously, preferred order flow or being able to, identify customer IDs. I'm not saying any competitors do this, right? But these comments and these questions quickly arise when you are monetizing and trading against your own platform. So we don't want to be involved in any of that because we think the downstream effects and the biggest way to build a fair and competitive exchange environment is to have it truly be laissez-faire and not be involved in the ecosystem and treat everyone the same way. Others obviously believe in the short-term preferential treatment. We're going to trade on our own platform and monetize our own customer base approach. And I think long-term we'll see, ultimately who's right. I'm not saying we're 100%, certain that we are the way that you should be operating, but it's definitely our belief right now, and we believe that that contributes to the long-term health of the exchange.
And from a product perspective, you've always been very product focused. A lot of the public comments you make are centered around, how you're trying to improve the user experience. Really, since your inception, back when we had you on in August 2022, actually re-listened to that episode just to get prepared for today. And we talked a lot not just about the need to educate the market on the value proposition of exchanges and even just, price shopping, price comparison in general. So you've always had a very product-oriented lens to building the business, Jake. And through that lens, one thing you launched very recently was the new RFQ system, request for quote, for parlays. Talk us through a bit about the development of that and maybe peel back the curtain a little bit on just like what goes into building functionality and technology like that. I would reasonably assume there's a lot of complexities in doing so. Just give us a bit of an insight into kind of that product initiative and that innovation you guys have recently brought to market.
Yeah, totally. The RFQ is one of the hardest projects we've ever built. We obviously have a pretty robust market making API for both institutions and individuals to come on and trade. So scaling that and building that, I'm sure anyone that's done that can attest to the challenges of doing so, especially seeing them at scale, which was another benefit of, launching in sweeps and, ultimately testing our tech and our scale of the platform. But as it relates to the RFQ, it's essentially, a mini exchange competitive process just applied to multi-leg outcomes, or parlays, as obviously they're known in the sportsbook world. So essentially you come on and we want the look and feel of the experience to mimic a sportsbook as much as humanly possible. So I put in my Packers and then my Josh Jacobs touchdown to use tonight's game as an example. And essentially, instead of when you do it on FanDuel or DraftKings and that price is built in real time and shown to you, that's just one price, right? You're told the price, what you can take. That's really it. Obviously, that's akin to a sportsbook experience on a straight play. And obviously, the exchange has advantages to being able to request your own pricing through things like that. But for the parlay and RFQ mechanism, as you build that parlay in real time, we send out that parlay to anyone that's connected to the RFQ API and essentially have an anonymous bidding process that takes place. So you, Jesse, can say, I want to price that at, plus 300 for the end user. And, player B, who's connected to the RFQ system as well, can say, well, I'm going to do it at 280. And then maybe you have player C that says, hey, I think it's at around plus 350. And as a result, we show the best odds to the consumer at plus 350. Now, that's dumbing it down a lot in terms of what's actually taking place. There's a lot to consider when you take into account what the stake of the parlay will be. As you go from 10 to 100 to 1,000, in terms of your stake on the parlay, that might reflect different price points. So you, Jesse, might be willing to take $100 on the Packers and Josh Jacobs at 3-1. But if it's $1,000, maybe you're offering 250 or 260 as a result for trying to lessen your exposure based on the size of the play. So it's quite complicated on the back end, but we're trying to obviously make that experience on the front end for the consumer as akin to sportsbooks as possible.
And when you guys do eventually launch under the CFTC model, Jake, and thinking about just product differentiation, how are you guys sort of thinking about, separating yourselves from the incumbents out there? How are you positioning the ProphetX offering to, be the choice of the consumer at the end of the day vis-a-vis the many other options they will have?
Yeah, I think it's our focus on sports, right? Whether it's UI, UX, market depth, market liquidity, the RFQ system. We've been building sports products for us almost 7 years at this point. So there's lots of landmines we've stepped on that I'm sure others will as well. There's lots of nuances to sports as it relates to other event contracts or event markets. So our understanding there and understanding of the end user and consumer and getting that product feedback, as you mentioned, we've been super product focused, and that starts with consumer feedback. So that's ultimately the way that we plan to compete. As it relates to the RFQ mechanism, it's something that's pretty rare in the market these days. So we're obviously extremely proud of that technology, but we know it's coming from other competitors, right? Even this last week, Jason Robbins mentioned that he would be rolling out, and he didn't explicitly mention RFQ, but I imagine it's an RFQ protocol for DraftKings when they first entered prediction markets. So it'd be fun to see how that plays out. Kalshi's also been operating it on a little bit of a smaller scale, but all these products, I would say, are pretty new to the market. So being able to build up that along with our market making API, along with our individual API that people can trade on and really scale those up, along with, just working from a sports inside out perspective is the way that we plan to compete against some of these incumbents and whoever else comes into the market.
What are your thoughts on the user acquisition ultimately, right? Like, to call it what it is, I mean, you guys are up against some very well-funded competitors with very strong, healthy balance sheets. You just mentioned DraftKings is now entering the arena. Who knows who else will be behind them? Very well-capitalized companies that already, have a lot of mind share and are sort of mass market brands. And to some extent, I mean, Prophet might be the David to their Goliath. How are you guys sort of thinking about getting out there and, again, finding your audience out there, finding your tribe and really endearing the Prophet product to those folks? What's the sort of thinking and strategy there on the user acquisition side?
Yeah, I think you said it best, right? Going and trying to out-acquire a Kalshi or a Polymarket or a DraftKings is probably a losing endeavor. I'm not saying it is full-heartedly. We can obviously do things on the product side to make our acquisition a lot more efficient and scalable, but going up against those balance sheets is something that will be extremely difficult and we'll have to get really innovative to do. The best way to do so is, and I'll quickly make the distinction that our application was for DCO and DCM's licenses. And what that means is that we'll essentially be clearing and settling trades. So similar to how Kalshi's connected to Robinhood, and Robinhood does a large portion of Kalshi's volume, that's definitely an approach that we're looking at. We've recently made some, regulatory advisory hires and some hires internally from the brokerage and the CFTC world. And as a result of that, distribution is really something that we're going to be focusing on. And the way that we're going to be focusing on that is, from a B2B perspective. So how else can we get the ProphetX markets into the customer's hands and out acquiring Kalshi and the DraftKings of the world from just a B2C spend perspective? I don't think that's the best way. From our resourcing standpoint, obviously owning the end customer is something that's way more valuable than being plugged into brokerages and having those brokerages facilitate the trades. But being hopefully one of the third or fourth DCO DCMs in the market will be something that we hope to leverage to get a lot more distribution through these brokerages. So a little bit of both. I'm not saying we've committed to either way yet. We got lots of time, or hopefully not a lot of time, to prepare for that. We'll see how the process goes with the CFTC, but it's definitely a fantastic question, one that we're still figuring out.
And just talking about that process with the CFTC, can you demystify that a little bit for us? I mean, obviously we all sort of scroll the same news sources and try and get a sense of what that does actually look like. But, for you and Dean and the team, you guys sit down with the folks at the CFTC, how do you even engage? What do those conversations look like? Just give us a bit of a sense of, the inside baseball on going through that process.
Yeah, so I should say that obviously the government shutdown is taking place right now. We were lucky enough to secure a meeting with the staff over there during the shutdown to be able to, talk with them, let them know who we are, introduce our business, and let them know, that we will be filing our application, and here's our application in full. I think something that makes us unique is that we're already operating a sports contract marketplace, whereas a lot of platforms come in and have the aspiration to do so. So our existing model, our existing compliance framework, something that we brought over from OSB from New Jersey, allows us to really stand out amongst the pack. However, as it relates to the process, it's a initial filing of the application. That application is essentially put on standby, whether, requests for more information and whether it's, filled out sufficiently is ultimately up to the CFTC and the staff. So you can essentially get in the line quickly by filling out, I would call it mediocre application, or you can wait and take the long approach and fill it out, in full and have a way more robust and legitimate application. And then that way you hope to have it, essentially move quicker through the queue as a result of it being taken more seriously. So we've taken the latter approach here. We haven't actually started any of those meetings with the staff yet. The shutdown should hopefully be ending in the next few days, and we're looking forward to that process. But outside the initial introductory conversation with them, let them know who we are, here's our business, here's what we intend to do. We're moving from sports to crypto derivatives to all different types of event contract offerings. But yeah, we are looking forward to starting that process, and hopefully the shutdown is over as this is released.
Look, the world of prediction markets feels like at the pace of the news every day and every week right now. Feels like they've been around forever, but zooming out, it's actually really hasn't been that long, right? I mean, Kelsey really only had this moment just around a year ago from now during the US presidential election. Obviously, with sports event contracts launching at the start of NFL this year, it's really seeming like all anybody's been talking about. And, as everybody's been talking about it, everybody has their takes, right? For better or for worse on what this is. So for you, coming from the, traditional betting exchange model to a sweepstakes-based model now to the CFTC model, and with your commitment to the sports vertical, Jake, how do you view prediction markets as a product category vis-a-vis traditional sports betting? Is this just another variant of sports betting? Is this something distinctly different in your mind? Like, how do you size up, I guess, the product ecosystem and the relationship between these different categories and verticals?
Yeah, I think it's really tough to do right now. You see lots of different use cases for prediction markets. Underdog's gotten super innovative with some of their ISV approaches and being able to offer their product in conjunction with their prop markets. That integration, that licensing process that they've went through is a lot shorter and a lot more of technical service provider as would be viewed in the OSB landscape. But that's been extremely innovative in itself, right? Just another differentiated way that you can work with prediction markets to bring that to a broader customer base. And then you have your traditional, FCM, DCO, DCM relationships like a Robinhood with a Kalshi, which is way more of the traditional model. I think DraftKings' entrance to the market is going to say a whole lot about what this is going to look like. I think the real needle mover for any company and also for the CFTC in terms of how this will differentiate from the OSB verticals will be the RFQ product and the parlay product. I think that obviously the straight product and the individual leg product that is being offered right now is extremely competitive to sports books. You see the New York numbers recently, and it's not eating a ton of market share away. Maybe it's developing a new customer base from it, but the straight versus the parlay is something that I think is pretty set in stone. The straight product on prediction markets is here to stay. Whether RFQs and that whole process is allowed, we're obviously very bullish on that and think that it is a place that should be licensed and oversaw by the CFTC. But if you get a differentiated product where you can't offer parlays, then obviously that's way stronger for OSB, traditional sports books, and state gaming operators. Whereas if it's something that can be offered by the CFTC licensed product, either in any different license basis, then it's really going to start to continue to blur the lines. And we're definitely more in that camp, but time will tell.
Sort of sticking with that theme for a second here, with the proliferation of prediction markets, my personal observation is that there's almost like a cultural moment happening, right? At least following what was formerly gambling Twitter, which is now seeming like prediction market Twitter. All of a sudden, there's all of these traders, different strategies being shared. And, downstream of that with things like mention markets, which frankly are a little bit gimmicky, maybe akin to like micro betting and in sports betting, traditional terms. We're betting on the weather. We're betting on will somebody say a word in an earnings call. What's your sort of just general, I guess, observation on the cultural impact of this proliferation of prediction markets and it being maybe something that is pulling people into more speculative, forms of entertainment than maybe they were otherwise doing with traditional OSB? What's your read on everything so far as it relates to just the cultural phenomenon that is prediction markets?
Yeah, it's a really good way to phrase it all. As you look at the combination of, sports betting Twitter meeting prediction market Twitter, I think there's some tension between the two. You've got prediction market Twitter discovering things like court siding or past posting that we would say in the traditional OSB sense. You have people that are actually live tweeting from lower tier tennis matches saying they've made a couple $100. While you have sports betting Twitter looking at that and saying, one, this is just court siding, welcome to the game. And then two, how are you only profiting, a couple $100 off of court siding? It's mind-blowing to a lot of us that have been operating in the sports book, sports betting ecosystem for a while. The mention market stuff, too, is extremely interesting, especially with Brian Armstrong and Coinbase and what they did recently. I mean, it just feels like we're in the first inning, to be honest. It feels very similar to when sports betting entered the US through the OSB, post-PASPA, all that type of stuff. We have a mass educational moment. And, when I came on a few years ago, we were talking about education here. And it still seems like, although, from where we were in 2022, trying to explain what an exchange was, what a peer-to-peer betting platform was, we've come a long way from then. It clearly shows we haven't made as much progress as one would have hoped with a lot of the prediction market individuals and people discovering, for what is lack of a better term, trading on sports or these sports event contracts. So it's just interesting because you have essentially your little niche of gambling Twitter here who's very in tune with what's going on in the space and the products in the space. And then you meet that with prediction market Twitter, who has basically never seen any of this stuff. It's something I don't think gambling Twitter would have expected because we're in our own little bubble on there. But then you have these guys coming on, courtsiding, pass posting, discovering all these things. But ultimately, I think it's a huge positive for the industry. Not the courtsiding and the pass posting, of course, but the overall education and uplifting and the cultural moment that's happening surrounding these prediction markets. And it's really hats off to Kalshi and Polymarket, right? They were able to educate and, kind of create the Google Q-tip type verbiage for their platforms to be able to make it more mass market. And that's something that we were never able to do in the OSB landscape.
And then, look, no startup conversation is complete without talking about capital for a second here, Jake. Obviously, Prophet does have a history of raising capital to get to where you are. And obviously, you've been in market for, you're probably no longer a startup. I guess maybe I should start there. But in any case, right, you're embarking on a new stage of the journey. Anything you can share insofar as how you guys are planning to capitalize this new chapter for Prophet?
Yeah, not something I can touch on today publicly. Hopefully we'll have more news to share in the next few weeks here. But I think historically looking at us, we have been a much more measured approach in terms of raising capital. It's not a growth at all costs type focus. We're not just throwing money at our partners. We're not really just trying to grow and get to the next round here. We're trying to build an economic and sustainable business. Obviously, that still needs venture funding, and it's something that we have done. But we're a lot more focused on, unit economics and monetization and building a business that actually at scale can operate efficiently and profitably. So that's our main focus right now. Of course, we need capital to get there, and we're in the works of doing things like that. But we're extremely excited for the next phase and everything that's to come.
And just on that excitement for this next phase, Jake, look, for you and Dean specifically, who are the co-founders and started this thing, way back in the day on your mission to the UK and then, coming back on shore and launching in New Jersey. It's been a ride for you guys, and you're here almost at the starting line again in this new iteration of Prophet. For yourself as a founder and as far into the journey, sort of how you feeling I'm going into it? Obviously, there is the excitement, but these are long years you guys have put in. It's an all-consuming experience, kind of doing what you're doing, pushing the boulder up the hill that you have the entire time. How are you sort of finding the motivation, the gas in the tank to keep pushing here? What are some of the things, I guess, that keep you going?
Yeah, I can confidently say this is the most excited Dean and I have ever been in 7 years of doing this. I alluded to it earlier, but we truly believe we found our home at the CFTC, and we've been looking for a way to bring our product to all 50 states and nationalize our liquidity pool and the product that we've been building over the past few years. And we feel like we're right on the precipice of that. So obviously, as you've alluded to, there's been lots of downs. There's been lots of ups as well. We feel like we're on the up, and we have been ever since we launched Sweeps, to be honest. But it's really a hats off to our customers, to be quite honest. People that have stuck with us from our early New Jersey days all the way through Sweeps, states getting shut down in Sweeps. And obviously, people have been very receptive and positive to the news today, moving to the CFTC landscape and vertical. And with that comes a lot more of, consumer trust, right? Sweepstakes is not something that people are aware of. There's no regulatory body, whereas the CFTC oversight is something that's much more legitimized. So we're doing great, honestly. We're the best we've ever felt. It's different challenges, right? When I talked to you in 2022, it was probably me and Dean making product decisions together with a much smaller team and, really pushing that boulder up the hill. But luckily enough, we're at the point where we've got senior leadership in place. We've got other C-level staff. So it's more about managing, executing, hiring the right people. Hiring has been a huge focus of ours over the last 6 months, getting the right people in place to go out and execute on our CFTC goal and ultimately our go-to-market in CFTC. So different challenges, different learnings. Growing the company has put us in a completely different, POV from where we were previously. And as a result of that, still learning out here, still having fun, still excited to bring our product to the mass market.
Right on, Jake. I'm going to let you get out of here in one hot minute, but before I do that, I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions to take us home. So when you get out of bed in the morning, you grab your phone, you open it up. What's the first app you're checking?
Twitter.
If you go to the karaoke lounge, what song are you singing?
Something by Queen, something Freddie Mercury. Anything Freddie Mercury works for me.
And last one here for you. If you could be anybody else for one day, dead or alive, who would that be?
Man, that's a good one. I would, from a, I would say professional point of view, it would be fantastic to look through the shoes of some of the early guys that tried what we're doing right now that weren't able to make it because of regulatory, not even scrutiny, but just because of the environment they were working in the past. Companies like Trade Sports, Canner Gaming, stuff that really came before my time, to be honest, that I've only heard about. So being able to understand, all the challenges that they went through and at scale trying to operate in a market that was not even close to legal at that time, but building the product to do so is just something that fascinates me. And obviously is, the predecessors of this industry, and they tried to do it for a long time, and ultimately it wasn't the right time to do so. Yeah, that's where I would lean. Other than that, yeah, I don't know. Any of the crypto derivative platforms would be super interesting and how those exchanges scale, but I guess that's more of a professional answer as well.
And for anybody listening, Jake, that wants to reach out and get in touch with you and your team, quickly plug the best way for people to get in touch with you based on everything you've shared here today, if anything's piqued their interest.
Yeah, if you're looking for any press inquiries, press at ProphetExchange.com. If you're looking to understand more about the product, get ProphetX.co is where you can find us. ProphetX.co is our actual platform, so a few different URLs there, but we've been, as you've said, at it for a long time. So depending on what you're looking for, you can always find us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, at PlayProphetX.
All right, Jake. Well, look, congrats to you and Dean and the team on making this decision and committing to this path, and really excited to see it unfold, and wishing you guys all the best for 2026 and beyond.
Cheers. Always good catching up. Appreciate you having me on.
The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 4 out of the top 5 US operators personalize player experiences with Optimove. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/bettingstartups. And if you like what you see, you'll get your first month free.